I am Stephen Gusukuma. I'm on faculty here at Baylor in the choral area. Here where I have a couple of ensembles that I regularly work with. I teach conducting, primarily beginning conducting, choral conducting. I've also taught graduate conducting and private conducting as well here on the faculty. And have also at times taught choral literature, and basically this next year I'll also teach choral methods. So doing a lot of things in a variety of kind of choral related topics here at Baylor. I'm also the minister of music at 7th and James Baptist Church, which is right across the street from Waco Hall here. It has a great connection to Baylor and this campus. I'm a Baylor alum, so I've kind of been through this place for a bachelor's music ed degree, and then I taught high school in McKinney, Texas, at McKinney Boyd High School, before coming back here for a master's in conducting, and then going to the University of Michigan for my doctorate. So that's the kind of quick wheel on my journey. Since this is about maximizing rehearsals, I thought we should start since it is time. And would you take a moment and would you stand? Okay, would you roll your shoulders forward and back? This is great. Do you mind, as we're doing this, could we just kind of go down the line, and would you say maybe your first name and then where you're from?
I'm Nathan. I'm from Gadsden, Alabama.
Good, that's great. We'll just continue. If you'll just mirror me as we go through, and when it's your turn, you can just introduce yourself.
I'm Sue, and I'm from Houston.
Good.
I'm William from Waco.
Good.
Wade Daniel from Barklesville, Oklahoma.
Ben Ball, Fort Myers, Florida.
Mike, why don't you join in?
Mike Eller from Raleigh, North
It's good
Carolina.
to see you.
I'm Ann from Noonan, Georgia.
I'm Emily from Austin.
Daniel from Los Angeles.
I'm Rick from Shreveport.
John from Austin.
Lon from Virginia.
Tom from Whitney, Texas.
Karen from Wichita Falls, Texas.
Anna Kim from College Station.
Great.
Heidi from Rhode Island.
Great.
Wesley from Hondo, Texas.
Great. Great to have you all here. Would you just repeat after me? Good. Would you breathe in for 4 counts, and would you sustain a hiss for 16? Breathe. 2, T, 4. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Good. Let it all out. Good. This time when you breathe in, would you extend your arms out just in a low, clear breath so that we really think about where our breath is connecting as singers? Would you breathe? 2, T, 20 now. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Good. Fantastic. Would you join me? Ha. Ha ha ha. Would you sing? Good, that's a fantastic sound. Would you, as you do that, would you chew as if you were chewing gum? Just Good. Notice how that changes the sensation for you and how it changes the room. Good. Now without chewing, would you keep that same sensation? Good. Would you make sure that when you breathe for that hum that you're not going, but you're going that has warm space to it, and then it's a silent breath. Mezzo piano. Good, lifting at the top. Good. Just sing. Good. Again, think about that initial breath. Good. When you check that with me, just good. As we go through this one, you make sure that it's that spinning. Good. That's fantastic. Let's change that a little bit, and when you sing. Minnesotan closed O, a very closed Germanic O. And the ah comes from that. Good. When you sing that mezzo piano. Good. Mezzo forte. Ever sing this vowel, but when you really make that an ah. So really just kind of portamento into that. Ready? Chord resonance that I love. So that mezzo piano. Good. Would you just make sure it's between the lines? Good. Just keep that spinning. And now a mezzo forte. Would you crescendo diminuendo with a phrase on O? Same thing on A. Here's what I mean. connected. So instead of zia, zia, here's an A. Would you sing ooh? Let's go back to this ooh. Good. Would you focus on tuning and not on volume, making sure that it's a pure sound. There we go. Ooh, join me. Good. Would you open that to an O, a closed O? You can almost hear the overtone. Ah. Yeah, to a dark ah that's here. There you go. Brightening the ah. To this ah. It's forward. Back here. Yes. Good. And to O. And to oo. Good. When you have a seat, we're still going to do a little bit of singing as we go through this. I hope that as you came in, you got not only a handout, but also a note card. On that note card, there is a number, and if you didn't get a note card, that's fine. Just pick a number, 1, 2, or 3. It doesn't matter. Hopefully you all know this. Yeah, just the Father, I adore you. Would you sing it all together? Ask. Make sure that when we sing the word you, that we really think about this you, and that would you use this gesture to help yourself there? Good, that's fantastic. What a beautiful pure vowel. Would you phrase that as your intuition leads? Yeah. Good. Would you phrase it again? Yeah. Good. Just as an example that we'll talk about later. If you are a 1, would you start initially? If you're a 2, we'll do this in canon. Would you start at the end of the first phrase? And if you're a 3, then would you come in then? So here we go. 1, 2, ready, and
Father, I adore you.
2s.
My life before you.
3s. Just hold the woo. 3s are finishing. Good. So just a few things there. As we were getting settled, as what always happens in your rehearsal, in my rehearsal, in our rehearsal, that we tend to have about 5 minutes or so at the beginning of every rehearsal that you can kind of choose to use or to lose, right? There are moments of time when people are getting off of their dinner breaks or their work schedules and they're coming in for rehearsal, and you know that you're going to have some people wander in. And so your decision is, how in the world do I use that time for something, for a purpose. And when I talk about maximizing rehearsals and about efficiency, it is so important to our process, particularly for church musicians. When I was teaching public school, it felt like I had forever to prep for concerts, right? I see them every day, I see them for 50 minutes a day. Now I have an hour and 15-minute rehearsal on a Wednesday night that, 80% of the people that will be there on Sunday are there, right? And then, we perform 3 different selections a Sunday. So we do a summons and an anthem and a benediction every Sunday morning. That's a lot of music. Now, those are not always full pieces. Sometimes they're verses of hymns, sometimes they're canons, sometimes they're a small group, sometimes they're, in the way that we plan. But the choir is on call 3 times every Sunday morning. And in an hour and 15-minute rehearsal that starts at 7:15, my college students often leave for college Bible study at 8 o'clock. And then I have until 8:30 for the rest of my rehearsal. That's a lot to manage week to week. And then on the brig projects, how in the world do you, in that time, prepare for a major work that happens at Christmas and a major work that happens at Easter within your regular time frame? Do you mind grabbing that door just for the sake of us bleeding sound? So, how do we do that? Well, we ask ourselves a lot of questions about how do we organize our rehearsals so that we maximize our time. And that starts from the moment that they walk in. So, is there an organizational strategy to how your choir walks in, to how they come in the door? For my choir, there's a long tradition at 7th and James that we don't have individual music folders that are theirs. There are certainly benefits to that, and there are a lot of disadvantages as well. The benefit is that when my singers walk in the room, they walk in the door, and they go right to the table where all the music for the evening is laid out, and it's laid out in rehearsal order, so that as they go down the line, they pick it up and they know exactly, they have it in rehearsal order. I'm not spending any time in between for them trying to figure out what pieces is which, and is this, or is my cover different than theirs, or, all of those kind of things that can burn valuable seconds in our time. Now, I have been an associate in a music church music program where the music minister took the time every week to reorganize every music folder in rehearsal order. That's crazy. If you have 24 singers, maybe. 15 singers, sure. If you have 80 or 100 singers in your choir, then there's no way, if you have a folder system, that you can do that. But there are other ways to make sure that you strategize, that singers know how to make those transitions, right? So if you have a whiteboard and you can put down what's the lineup of things that you're going to rehearse in what order, that at the very least is really helpful to your singers. Also, if you can lay out what are the next things. When I was minister of music at First Presbyterian in Northville, Michigan, we had a system where we would list the next 4 upcoming weeks, and we would list what the selections were for that, so that as we were going through, singers knew this is what I have to think about and prepare for a week from now, or 2 weeks from now, or I'm going to be out 3 weeks from now, and so that's what I feel like I need to know. But it's so important that singers know how they come in the door, how do they get their music, do they have folders that are assigned, do they have an assigned seat in your rehearsal space. This is an interesting one, but I think really valuable. How many of you use a seating chart and assigned seats in your rehearsals? I would wager to guess very few. And there's a lot of things in here that I am either working to implement or honestly don't implement because of my specific setting. And so I want to say to you, you have to find what tailor works for your individual choir and your room and your setting. But I think assigned seating can be really valuable. Why? Well, first of all, it really builds ownership within your choir. If your singers know that there's an assigned seat for them, that they have a place that is theirs, and that section knows that evening who is there and who isn't there, that means something. It's so easy. If you have a choir, an adult choir of 60 or 70 or 75 or 80, you could look across and you say, there's a great amount of people here, and you may not realize that a person is missing if there's not an empty chair for them. And that conversation on a Sunday morning to say, hey, we really missed you at choir rehearsal, is really valuable to your singers. And it may be that 15 minutes or 10 or after warm-up, you scoot everybody in and you fill in your sections so that you don't have, gaps or whatever. But I think it's really important for your singers to know that you have created a space for them, that you want to know whether they're there or not there, and that your singers also know who should be there and who shouldn't, and who isn't there at that time, so that those contacts can be made. How are sections arranged? Some people will do symphonic settings, soprano, alto, tenor, bass. Some will do sopranos and then basses and then altos and tenors. That's my current arrangement. If you have 5 tenors and you have 20 sopranos and 20 altos, then maybe the best setting is for you to do sopranos, small group of tenors right in the front and center so that they can be heard and that their sound isn't muffled by anybody else. Basses behind them, because there are probably fewer, and then altos on the other side. I've used a lot of different arrangements with church choirs, but use something that will benefit their sound the most, and will help them blend. That typically means that basses are in the back, so that fundamental sound is in the back of the choir. But make sure that you have thought through how do I arrange the choir so that we can be the most successful. We're not working against ourselves in hearing as an ensemble, so that you don't have to work things that will naturally take care of themselves. I will also say that's the other thing about seating, right? If you have a seating chart, then you can set your core voices next to your weaker voices. You can set your section leaders in positions where when you need them, they can lead. So I think there's tremendous strategy to that. How does your room layout compare to your sanctuary layout? Is it the same? Can it be the same? If it can be the same as your seating in the sanctuary, that's certainly ideal, because then your transition into the sanctuary is so easy. The singers know I'm 6 chairs in on this row, and boom, that's so easy. Do you have an option to flip your room around? From public school teaching, you realize that if you have singers that come in late, if they have to come in at the front of the room, that's incredibly distracting, right? If you have singers that come in late and then they have to cross behind you, or they even come in and everybody's looking at who came in and what time they came in. Likewise, if you put your clock behind you, right, then everybody has the ability to stare at the clock and they know what time it is and they know how many minutes are left in rehearsal. So if you're a public school teacher, you always think about where are the least amount of distractions. So is there an option for singers to come in the back? Or is there an option, if you have 2 doors, is there an option for you to request or put a sign up that says please use this entrance, so that people come through, they have a pathway to get their music, and then they come in the least distracting way. It's also distracting for you to stand here and have somebody come in who you don't know who that person is, who just walked in, and then you turn, and then everybody looks, and then you've lost them. And you've lost a minute of rehearsal simply by that moment, and it's no fault of the person that came in late. It just is the way things are. So, can you, if you have a flat space, can you flip your room around so that your seating is in a place where people can come in the back, get their stuff, and then simply come into place, and so that you can greet them as they come in with a glance. Again, think about where your clock is, because that matters too. that's the kind of how is your room oriented. Let's think about everything that we can do to make sure that our choir is as focused and is as successful as it can be. And is there any pre-work that you can do that will save you time or make creative use of the rehearsal? One example of that is note cards like that. Is there a reason for you to use note cards like when they come in, or to lay materials out on seats before your choir comes in? If you can do any of that, whether that's handing out new music, whether that is announcement sheets, or whatever it is, if all of that can be laid out, then you are not spending time going through those things. Again, when every minute is precious, it's so important that you do that. So then let's talk about warm-up time. I think it's critical that you start your rehearsals on time. That doesn't, as I mentioned to you, I think there's about 4 or 5 minutes that you burn at the beginning. But that doesn't mean that you can't start those warm-ups and stretches right on time. So that if anybody does come after the designated start time, they know that there's activity going on. So they know they missed out on something. Stretching is really, I think, important to choirs. I will tell you that after a day here at Baylor, and then my evening schedule and waiting until 7:15 for my rehearsal, I need the stretch just as much as anybody in my choir needs the stretch. And so the ability for you to just start right on time with stretching and warm-ups, body warm-ups, breath warm-ups, you're training the people that are there and to be great singers. You're also enabling, there's a lot of time there to say, how did that vacation go? How was that event? There's a lot of conversation and catching up that can happen informally in that space. And you can build connection to your singers. Or you can do announcements as you're talking during that time. Use that time creatively, but certainly let's not just, I'm guilty of standing around and saying, oh, well, we'll have a committee meeting that gets out, I'll have people in 5 minutes, and we just kind of sit around and we just kind of wait. But that's teaching time that you can use to make your choir better singers. Vocal exercises. We went through a range of these. It is so important that when we warm up our singers vocally, that we do so musically. I've sat in so many rehearsals where it's just about going through ranges more than it is anything else. So if you go through an exercise and you use that's all it is. There's no commentary involved in between the way warm-ups are given, and you go up the range and you go down the range, and there it is. You're officially warmed up. Warming up is really more, and our warm-up time should be used to create a musical choir. If we want to build efficiency in our choir, it means about teaching concepts. It means that our choirs need to be attentive to the sound that they're making, to the warmth of that sound, to how they're connected to the voice next to them, and the voice in front of them, and the voice across the choir. So there's a lot of focus for me in warm-ups on vowel alignment, on making sure that we have a concept of what is a pure oo vowel, what is a pure o vowel, what is a warm sound versus a bright sound. And I may want both at some point in rehearsal, but we need to understand what that's striving for. What is mezzo piano today? What is mezzo forte today? What is fortissimo today? What is a lot of vibrato? What is very little vibrato? And so if we use within the warm-ups that you already do, if we imagine those warm-ups in ways that we are attentive to breath. Notice that there were times in the middle of warm-ups that I said, just key in. Would you make sure that when you're breathing for that breath in that space, that you're breathing well? If you hear in your choir, then maybe you need to draw their attention to what is a warm, silent breath. To color, would you sing that? Would you sing that as warm and as beautiful as you can sing? Would you sing that bright and brassy? Would you, would you experiment as you go through each of those? If we're going to repeat exercises over and over and over, up and down a range, we can we can use that as creative time to discover as a choir. Phrasing. Do you let your choirs breathe anywhere in that, or do you phrase crescendo, diminuendo, and the reverse? When I asked you to sing this exercise, crescendo as a natural phrase, right? So a crescendo and a diminuendo, that was one operation. If we ask our choirs to do the opposite of that and to finesse the top, it feels for most of our amateur singers like a completely different operation. Maybe for us as trained singers, it feels like a completely different operation. And that's an operation that is very hard to figure out what kind of breath does that need. How do I reshape and replace that vowel so that it works in there? Will you use that in repertoire? Absolutely. But if you haven't taught it in a warm-up, if you haven't taught it in a way that they have thought about it and that you as a group with singers next to you can navigate that, then it's much more or less likely that they're going to be able to access it on their own in the repertoire. There's also opportunities for you to build conducting gestures into your warm-ups. So if I want a pure vowel or a pure O vowel, there is no doubt that I will, in conducting, that I will remind my singers, is that a pure U coming up? Is that a closed O? Is that a warm ah? So that my singers know and understand, am I asking for warmth? Am I asking for brightness? Am I asking for... And so if you will allow yourself to start building some of those intuitive gestures and having your singers connect with them, then when you show that gesture in your conducting, then they will know exactly what they need to be attentive to. So, also incredibly important that you support your vocal exercise musically, or your accompanist supports it musically. There is no substitute in terms of building musicianship into a choir than a really musical accompanist. It will make or break the musicality of an ensemble. It's so hard to fight against an amusical support, a musical accompanist. If you have an accompanist that will just bang away at notes when they're giving, if I taught, I could teach this to a choir. Doubt that they would bang all the notes. There's no doubt that they could find all the notes, they would sing them. If I introduced it, that's exactly what I would get out of the choir. So even if it's a simple line, if we will make sure that we walk into a different world as choristers than we do as congregational singers. The expectations are different for you as a musical leader in a choir than it is for you as a congregational singer. And the way that we present even hymns, I love singing hymns with church choirs for summons and responses. One, because I get to use hymns that we never get to use and introduce parts of the hymnal that we never get to use in our service because they just don't fit in the structure of our service. But also because we get to hear those hymns in a different musical way that we don't as congregational singers, unfortunately. So I can tell our singers, yes, you would always breathe there as a congregational singer, but we're not going to breathe there because that's not what the phrase is. And in some ways, then we're attentive to the language and we're attentive to what's there, and we learn these wonderful hymns in a different way, and we connect with them in a different way. So a lot kind of embedded in there. There's a lot of other options. If you're trying to build skills, there are periods, particularly in the summer, where in my church choirs, I'll ask, we'll pull out hymnals, and we'll just do 3 requests of hymnals to sing. And we'll just sight read them. And it's a chance for them to practice their sight reading. We'll read them in parts, and we'll see, and it gives me an idea of how well the choir is progressing in terms of reading parts. And in the summer, when it's laid back, I totally have opportunity to do that. But inviting them into shared songs, into a hymn sing is another opportunity. It's so hard when you face an upcoming service or a special service for you to say, I absolutely need to devote 10 minutes of time in rehearsal to these things. It's so easy to feel the stress of, oh man, they just really don't know pages 5 and 6 of this, and I'm really worried about it. For you to not just dive right in and ensure that you have, those pages learned for the performance that you have. But what I'm trying to ask you to consider is to consider that the long-term benefits of building a choir that understands choral concepts. From where I stand as a choral educator, a generation where we are honestly starting to see fewer and fewer singers that come up through churches and have full church choir experiences, whether that's through children's choirs, youth choirs, sanctuary choirs, where we're seeing less community masterwork singers. If I asked the incoming freshman class of music majors at Baylor who had sung a complete Messiah, I would probably have absolutely none of them that have sung Messiah. I have played excerpts from Messiah in choral literature classes here, and had students unable to tell me that was from Messiah. So we don't have that same generation of trained choral musicians embedded in our choirs. And that means that it really is up to us to build the choral concepts, to build rules for our choirs, to ensure that our choirs and our adults, our amateur singers, understand what are the basic choral concepts that we kind of take for granted so often. So, to that end, I think there are some great rules for choirs. None of these are mine, but Judy Bowers, who retired from Florida State recently, she's now director of music education, I think, at Louisiana Monroe, which is she's from Louisiana, just retired there and decided to join the faculty. But and these are, you can search and find a ton of these handouts because she does this presentation all over the nation. But she has these rules for transfers. Most of these rules, and this sheet comes from presentations that are really geared towards middle school and early high school singers. But this is the kind of basic choral concepts of things that I'm talking about. And you'll find this on the second sheet that you have there. So rules for transfer. Rules that apply in general to all choral music that you see. The rule of the steady beat. Singing any note value longer than steady beat value, singers should crescendo slightly. So thinking about forward momentum through long notes. If we build that concept into our singers, it helps energy, it helps intonation. If we can build that as a concept that every singer knows, how much time would it save us in the long run, instead of correcting every moment by moment mistake as we go along. The rule of consonant releases. So thinking about in this song, at this tempo, every release you can think of as a quarter release. Or at this slow tempo, every release will take the 8th release. If you can set those things up conceptually, and better yet, what we'll talk about, if you can show them, instead of having to tell them every time, you will save a ton of time. Diphthongs about how you handle vowels. Rules of punctuation in the line, when you can take a breath and when you can't take a breath in a phrase. And so rules of word stress. So stressed syllables, unstressed syllables. If we are attentive to those things, our choirs will automatically be so much more musical if we can ingrain them into our teaching. And then, do you have pet peeves in particulars? I certainly do. There are things that I care about. I am a deliver person. So unstressed, kind of DEs, REs, all of those are IHs for me. That's they weren't before I left for Michigan, but they were when I came back. So I'm a deliver person versus a deliver person because I like my internal organs. But you know, that's one of my pet peeves. And so do you have particular things that you care about that your choir should learn about? This is my musical preference every time as a default, see, instead of a default. As a default, that is how, you know, what do they need to know about you? And if you can build those things in, again, you don't have to, hopefully the long term is that after 6 months of singing with you, you don't correct those things anymore. And that's where we save ourselves time in the long run if we'll devote progressively small amounts of time to address them over the long run. Dr. Jerry Blackstone, one of my mentors who just retired from the University of Michigan, one of his things, and he, I know, has been here at Alleluia conference and presented, is the last note is the softest, sweetest, warmest, most beautiful. It's one of his catchphrases. Thinking about ensuring that that last note is always cared for in a beautiful end of phrase, elegant manner. Is that true 100% of the time? No, of course not. But it's true more often than not. And if we can get our choirs to just sing musically and taper the ends of phrases in that way, that is, you know, soft, beautiful, blended, exquisite sounds that you lean in for, to me, are the moments that make a piece. I love the full stuff. I love boisterous singing. I love all of that. But it really, to me, shows how musical a choir is by how they sing softly. Are there other resources that you can provide for your choirs? Choirs, now, I don't think it's a given that they know what a beautiful choral sound necessarily is. So are there opportunities for you to share recordings? There are so many now. I just taught a literature course as part of the Summer Voice Institute here, and I wish that when I started teaching that I had access to as many recordings as there are, good recordings. I mean, you know, entire libraries of produced recordings on YouTube, you know, that are hosted with a picture of a CD cover and, you know, attributed, and there it is. You have professional recordings that are available now to send out to your choir that they can listen to on any device, and they can know what a beautiful choir sounds like. Make sure that you send them out a recording that you believe in. Don't send them a recording of a choir that sings completely straight tone if that's not what you want or should want in your choir. Don't do it. But you can find one. You can find a mature, beautiful sounding choir, because you look up any piece in our repertoire and you can find a recording, a professional recording, a great church choir, you know, is somewhere doing that piece. You can also imagine that piece in ways that you can't in your small church choir. You can also imagine that as a fully orchestrated piece. That changes the music for your singers if they hear it as a fully orchestrated piece than if they hear it just with, you know, a piano reduction. Are there markings that you can dispense to your choirs in advance? That can be tedious. I know it can. But if you're doing something in the public domain, if you're doing a major work and you're copying scores anyway, if you're doing any work and you're copying scores, if you're doing print on demand, which is so accessible to us, you have a license to print 80 copies. Well, before you print those 80 copies, you should print one and mark it with every musical possible thing that you want, and then you should make your 80 copies. Think about how much time that saves us in the process. from saying, I really want this to be a mezzo piano when it's there for them. I really want this release on the 8th in this moment, and the quarter here instead, if all of those things are there. One thing I would never recommend that you do, that I had to do, was to turn one of my doctoral recitals around in a week. So I essentially started rehearsals on Sunday, and I had several rehearsals during the day, an orchestra rehearsal on Saturday morning, dress rehearsal Saturday afternoon, and a performance the following Sunday afternoon. Don't recommend that. But you better believe that for my 26 singers that are part of that, I took every score that we had and I marked. And I transferred every marking that I had, because I didn't have time to do it any other way. I didn't have time in rehearsal that week to say, no, this really needs to be this, that really needs to be a bright E or a closed E. That really needs to be on the quarter. We really need to carry this moment here, even though it's not natural for us to. So you better believe that in order to make that week happen, short timelines happen, there was a ton of preparation. There was a ton of pre-work to go into it. I really marvel at so many church musicians that have already programmed their Christmas music, because I certainly haven't. I mean, I'm just thinking about what is our big work, and I'm kind of on the fence between 3 different things, and I won't decide that until after the semester starts at Baylor, because I have to prep for the courses that I'm teaching here. But you all start preparation, so many of you are so good about preparing so early for these events. Surely there's time. Or surely you can get scores early to your singers and post a PDF of markings and say, this week, would you mark this, would you just transfer these, would you take the 10 minutes and transfer these markings for your part into your score, so that when we do our big production that we're all on the same page. There are ways that we can do that will make us so much more efficient. And then, so you can create, again, recordings and listening lists. You can create playlists on YouTube. You can create playlists on Spotify, and you can send them out and say, I really love this piece. Better yet, you can ask your singers to submit pieces that they love to you, or pieces that they're listening to. There are, every year, I send an email to my choir and I just say, what are some things, I can't guarantee that I'm gonna program them, but what are some music that you're like, I've always wanted to sing that piece? Or I heard this, I went and visited my nieces, and I went to their church, and I heard this anthem, and I thought this anthem would be perfect. And well, send me it, find me it, send me a PDF of that. I ask for it all the time, because it's a great moment if, I've ordered that piece, and that's a great moment for them to say, oh, you really listened to what I wanted, and this is a great piece, and I want to share it, and I want to talk about what my experience was with this piece, or whatever. So there's just so many benefits to these kind of things. I cannot believe there are so many things to talk about in such little time. So, do you kind of understand what I'm getting at in terms of building concepts in our choirs, in terms of doing some of the pre-work? The last thing that I want to say, that in terms of making efficient rehearsal, maximizing how efficient we are, is that we really must think about how we conduct. I think it's really critical that we have some basic skills, because if we are just keeping time, oftentimes we are working against the natural musicianship in terms of what is intuitive for a soft dynamic or a full dynamic. Or we're working against where we have asked them to breathe because of our gesture. And so what I've enclosed here is that I feel like there are a few kind of critical gestures, not many, but critical gestures for you as a conductor when you work with your church choir. One of those is a beautiful, even flowing gesture. I think as a default, if your gesture can evenly flow through time and space, versus having any kind of whip, or bounce. The connection of your singer to the sound, to the breath, to the vowel is so much better than what you will get naturally out of singers if you're kind of bouncing along. Okay? So I've marked the basic patterns that I use in terms of a 4 and a 3. And I tend to just use 1, 2, 3, 4. And it takes time for you to monitor, can you evenly control at any tempo a beat and a rebound to make sure that your gesture is elegant and fluid. Most of our music lives, that is, legato, linear music should live on the horizontal plane. If it's loud, full, boisterous music, then it should be more vertical and our beats should land closer together. But in general, I think we're better off with an even gesture. And I have a harder time teaching even legato gesture to our beginning conductors than anything. It is such a tough skill to build that kind of fine motor tuning. It's just not intuitive. The other gesture that I think is critical is that within that is a subdivision. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Why? Because that's your method for slowing down. So if you're going 1 and 2 and T and 4 and 1, the way to be clear is to incorporate subdivision at what point you want it. And that facility, also the facility to subdivide when you want breaths on the end is incredibly important. So if you sang the My Shepherd Will Supply My Need, and most of us know it, what would you sing?
My shepherd will supply my need, Jehovah.
Okay, so within, if I think about an even legato gesture, would you sing again? Yeah.
My shepherd will supply my need, Jehovah.
The amount of facility, if I simply just move evenly and I think about size and space, my left hand isn't involved at all. It's just my right hand. I think we can all handle that. And I think if I can show that instead of try to teach it, we crescendo to this moment here and then we diminuendo here. Oh, don't start it too early, all of this. If I can decide in a moment whether we breathe on the quarter or the eighth, would you sing again?
My shepherd will supply my need,
Or supply my need, or supply my need. Right? There are differences there. Again, I'm only using my right hand. So a subdivision, a stop gesture, or a click. And by click, I mean, if we think about 1 and 2 and T and 4 and a wrist click. Yeah, I could go supply my need, need, and when I release my wrist, then my singers are free to breathe, right? So those gestures with the right hand, I think, are critical to you saving yourself time in rehearsal for when releases happen, for togetherness when your choir slows down or speeds up. I think it's really important. And thirdly, independent left hand releases. So, supply my need, Jehovah. It's so clear if we can just show a moment. It can be a circle cut off, it can be a point cut off. But if we will practice cutting off at different beats, whether that's 1, 2, 3, 4, off. Doesn't matter to me if you stop your right hand. If you can't continue motion, you stop and cut off with your left. If your left hand can be designated for cutoffs, it saves us a ton of time. It really can. Every time that my left hand comes up, boom, that my fingers are attentive to that moment. So if you think about, 1, 2, cut off, and we just practice, where might those things happen? Do they happen on the and? 1 and 2 and T and 4 and? Can we just show a point with our left hand? Then, again, we've created an opportunity where you control all of those fine details that sometimes we spend 5 or 7 or 10 minutes trying to get in a rehearsal, because it's those fine details that are tough to align in our choirs. And the most efficient way to align them is straight from you, is from your gesture. And if you, so continuing to build facility there is incredibly important. Okay, questions about those things so far? Yeah, we're getting towards the dinner hour, and I stocked up on coffee, which is important for me. I'm not sure whether you had the same luxury. Other things, closing a rehearsal. We always do announcements and prayer requests at the end of our rehearsals. You probably do. If you're if you have a large church choir, sometimes that there are ways to, maybe you can't have a full-blown choral discussion about all of the announcements that are coming up, or about all of the prayer requests and individual requests. But what you can do is you can hand out a note card every rehearsal, and you can say, would you take a moment, if you need prayer for something, would you write on that note card? And would you pass that down, and we'll compile those and we'll email those out to the choir. We can save ourselves a lot of time, and we can connect with our choirs if we'll use systems to do so. So again, if we'll be creative about how we use materials in that way, it can be so meaningful as well as efficient in our rehearsal. And then you have a closing tradition. 2 minutes of each of my rehearsals is spent waiting on who will close us in prayer. Because I end and I say, we do prayer requests, and then I say, who will close us tonight? And I refuse to do it. That's not completely true, but I would prefer that a member of the choir prays for us and dismisses us. So, one of my college intern singers, scholarship singers, said, we used to have this thing, this chorister's prayer that we used to say, and this was from her church back home, and she emailed it to me, and she said, if there's an awkward pause in rehearsal, then we should just all say this together. You can find it, there's a ton of schools and churches and programs that use it, but this, bless, O Lord, us thy servants who minister in thy temple, grant that what we sing with our lips, we may believe in our hearts, and what we believe in our hearts, we may show forth in our lives. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. So if it's an evening and nobody wants to volunteer, then maybe you teach your choir this, and you hand it out on slips, and so they have it memorized, and then when they have it memorized, then it's yours, and it's theirs wherever they go. It was clearly meaningful to that college student that they brought with them to my rehearsal, and I hope that it will become meaningful to us. And that's a incredibly sacred experience to share in that way, and for us to bring who we are and our journeys to the table. So, thinking about again, not just what saves us time, but also creates the most meaningful experiences, is so important to me, so important to your singing.